everybody. Welcome to the CoinGeek weekly live stream. I am your host, Mr. Kurt Wooker Jr., rocking live from sunny South Florida. And yes, it is sunny again. Our winter was nearly 3 weeks long this year, and it was killing me. But no, good to be back, getting some warmth and rocking and rolling. We've got production also live from sunny South Florida. I got the secret anonymous. In fact, actually, if you want to let me know in the private chat if you would like to be known and heard and given accolades, my dear producer. But yeah, so we are rocking and indeed also rolling. I'm Kurt Wooker Jr. We are doing the thing and all the things as we do every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you could like, subscribe, I already fumbled it. Like, subscribe, and hit the alert bell so the technocrat overlords and the AI monsters they have put in charge of our lives and souls, let them know that you would indeed like to consume my content voluntarily and maybe involuntarily every once in a while as well. So tell your friends that we are live, and we will be taking questions from the troll box. And from that troll box, I would imbue you to please prepare questions for one David Case. The Shruggy one, the Shrugger, as it were, Chief Shrug Officer of Shrugger Incorporated. So David is like the go-to man on the low level technical priority stuff in Bitcoin. Like, does it need to be indexed? Do we need to create a bespoke solution to get your data from monolithic blockchain thing all the way to your application? David has done a lot of really great things in the space for many, many years. In fact, David and I think we've now been friends. It's got to be going on six years plus now. We met at the Big Blocker Chicago meetup, or it might have been the Bitcoin Cash meetup or the BSV meetup or something at whatever point that was. But David and I are going a ways back at this point. And yeah, but since then, he's put more transactions on chain than probably anybody else still, I'm guessing. And then basically the consulting that he's done over the last year and a half or so has really changed the face of how Bitcoin application works at a pretty fundamental level, and now implementation on a bunch of the really cool stuff in the space. So there is a lot to learn from David, and it's a good thing that he is now streaming a lot of his lucid thoughts and live coding and doing Q&A sessions with people on a really regular basis as well. So you should check out David on social media, where he streams all of his goodies for the free consumption of the good people of Big Block Bitcoin. So we'll have David on in a couple of minutes. I just want to reiterate something that happened over the last 10 days. I was SIM swapped, and I didn't really go into details about it because I was still kind of in the middle of essentially a cyber terrorism attack. And now that we've got things mostly cleared up, of course, you never know if it's all the way over, but seems that we've gotten things mostly cleared up here. And my article that I published today was about the one really fun day that I had at the Counterparty Conference here in Miami last weekend, like 10 days ago now. And how I was supposed to be on stage to debate one Gabe Higgins on Sunday, but instead got no sleep and spent my entire day fighting cyber criminals. So that was a good time. But the article kind of goes into more of the details, talking about like the history of counterparty tokens, indexing stuff on Bitcoin circa 2014 and 15, what it means to bootstrap fungible, non-fungible assets before the word NFT was even created, and how really everything that you can even think of in the blockchain space as it pertains to tokens really came from Bitcoin over a decade ago, which is pretty funny because now almost nobody even knows that stuff happened. I had a little spicy debate today with, he goes by Lightning Eric, who is saying I'm unhinged, dishonest, et cetera, because for various reasons. But ultimately, I just want the world to know the story of what Bitcoin can do, so that maybe you can figure out what Bitcoin should do for your business and for the world and for human self-sovereignty and all of those things. Like, we don't expect these things to be easy, but if life was meant to be easy, we probably would have had longer arms and faster metabolisms. I don't know. So everybody, again, please like, subscribe, hit the alert bell. Thank you to our sponsors. Every week we have Rock Wallet, who has been delightful to sponsor us for about the last year here on the show. And then Champions TCG, which has probably been about 6 months. You guys are also awesome. You make this stuff so much fun, and they give away an entire deck of cards to one lucky person every week. And that lucky person must be the commenter of the day. So if you come up with something humorous or insightful or engaging, you are likely to win the Champions TCG free deck of cards that you have to get on your Handcash wallet. So make sure you download Handcash and have that ready and set up. All you got to do at the end of the show, once you've been announced, is reach out to the Real CoinGeek account on X, and they will be sent to you forthwithly. So before we get too deep into the weeds and me chattering, we should cut to a break. I believe the ad will be from Rock Wallet. And after you watch 30 seconds of the best non-custodial wallet in the space, maybe at least the best one that sponsors the show, if you would like to be featured as the best, also you can compete with Rock Wallet for who gets to advertise on the show. Wouldn't that be a lot of fun? So you can watch the ad. It's 30 seconds long. Rock Wallet's pretty great. Like, big fan. I use Rock Wallet myself. We use it in our business, and it's really good. And then we'll be right back with David Case. So let's roll that ad. Here we are live on the air. David, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good, Kurt. That's a funky little riff on that ad there.
It is. I'm doing the same thing. I'm playing like the air bass. So you are, like I said in the intro, one of the most prolific developers and creators in the space. Not a man of extreme fanfare. Your talent is only preceded by your humility in many cases. But David, I think I was still accurate in saying you're at least a good chunk responsible for maybe the most transactions in the history of blockchain tech. Is that still a valid stat to introduce you with?
I mean, so between like crypto fights, I think we did about $500 million. I did about $500 million for record, and then we're somewhere in the like 300,000 or 300 million, I should say, for in the OneSat ecosystem. So.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been throwing around I have put more transactions on a public blockchain than anyone else on the planet, and I think it's true.
It is probably true. I'm pretty sure it's true. So congrats to you. Was that a goal you set out when you came into the blockchain space? Or
not even a little bit.
That's funny.
But it's actually kind of been learning how to do that, like with crypto fights, first of all, kind of set me up to be able to help record out with their kind of tests of the network and what you can do.
Yep.
And then the OneSat stuff's just been completely organic.
That's awesome. So going from where you were, say 2 years ago, working, primarily with crypto fights, and then moving into this, I don't know if gun for hire is exactly the right way to put it, but something of a mercenary of the blockchain. When you see the way people design applications, and this is something I actually know the answer to a degree, so humor me. But when you see the way that people design applications to like utilize the UTXO set correctly versus lots of chain transactions, which is something that people tend to reflexively do and then realize causes problems. What would you say if you were to give a single piece of advice to people building applications from the position of wallet management, UTXO management? Could you break down, like, please build your apps like this? Is there a way to simplify that thought before we get a little more into the weeds?
I don't really think there is. I mean, so a Bitcoin transaction is this like tool that you can model all sorts of, you can model pretty much anything in chains of UTXO spends and transactions. And so there's kind of like, you really have to ask the question, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the, like, because you can do, I mean, there's just so many different ways that you can even approach things of like, okay, do my actual UTXOs and spending them imply relationships, or is there other stuff such as like the data that I'm writing into the transaction, which is where the relationships are implied, and
Right.
the UTXO spending is just like, how do I fund these things to get them on chain? So it really, really depends on what you're trying to do. And unfortunately, that's kind of the, like, there's been a lot of devs that are asked me like, okay, I want a tool for this, or is there a tool to do this? And the real answer is, I mean, pretty much everything, whether you're writing custom script contracts, whether you're modeling out different mechanisms to represent structure on chain, like how you do it is entirely different dependent on what you're trying to do.
Sure.
So it's not easy answer.
It's hard. Well, especially when you consider, this concept broadly, and this is stuff that was talked about over the last few years for, how to do Bitcoin right. You get the people who are pure, like everything needs to be peer to peer. You got to utilize SPV. And then you have to have that conversation like, well, there's not great SPV tools. There's not great, headers client stuff out there. Like there's not a lot of underlying infrastructure, which is why I think folks like yourself have had to take a step back and say, hey, this looks really good on screen at the the conference for how Bitcoin should be bootstrapped, but we're not quite there yet. So what I guess what was the first thing that when you really got into the engineering of it, you realized, oh, okay, this doesn't exist yet and needs to that really to drill into? Is there a major one, or is it like, well, Kurt, there's things,
I mean,
only an hour
it's kind of been a continual revelation of that fact over and over and over again. But I will say, like, the very first days back at Crypto Fights, where we're trying to model these concepts that basically ends up chaining lots of transactions together. So like there's the simple piece that every developer can use that says, okay, if I want to broadcast a transaction, I send it to a miner, and then it almost always works and gives me back a transaction ID, and I'm good to go.
Yep.
Well, as soon as you start sending in hundreds of thousands of transactions that all depend upon each other, well, then there's a whole other level of complexity of, because like, especially if you're not like, if you have one node that you're broadcasting it all to, and that node is, I mean, I guess I don't want to get too far off in the weeds, but like, if you have one place you're sticking everything through, it will receive the one transaction before it gets the next transaction, before that gets the next transaction, because you're sending it all to one synchronous point.
Yep.
But how the network propagates, it doesn't work that way. Like a node gets some transactions that one node that's getting all the transactions will send some of them to some peers and other ones to other peers, and then those peers need the dependent ones, and you just end up with this mess where essentially, and an SV node is another one of those. This isn't quite mature enough for this kind of use case yet. Sure. So it would just get to a point where it's like, I got too much stuff in the mempool. I got to start prioritizing the stuff that's the most profitable, kind of the BTC way of looking at things. And then whole clumps of your transactions just kind of fall out of memory. And so that's probably was the biggest first, like, oh, there's a lot of in-between engineering between I build this transaction and this transaction gets mined. And
so when we talk about like the whole Bitcoin stack right now, like there's a few sets of tooling. You get the people that prefer to use things like what's on chain API, or they use BitTails, or they use Jungle Bus, or any of these things to kind of get their data from Bitcoin. And then, then there's the next level of things. You have your token indexers and some of the stuff, all of which, you've been pretty intimately involved in. And now there's this sort of future of overlay services, which is another one of those things that looks really nice on a slide at the conference, but hasn't really been implemented yet in a Bitcoin paradigm. Can you go over maybe the differences between something like what's on chain API versus Jungle Bus, and then like what is being indexed through these token indexers, and then how might that look different practically with these overlay services? And I should preface by saying this is some of the really great stuff that you've been talking about on your streams that are live on your channel. So I would encourage everybody to subscribe to David's stuff, like set your alerts on David's stuff over on X, because he's been doing these a couple days a week and they're really valuable for me. And that's partly why I want you to share here to gin up a little bit of extra activity on your streams too. So
yeah, and I'm streaming on YouTube as well. So
awesome.
So yeah, I guess at a conceptual level, what's on chain and Jungle Bus are very similar as far as the data that they are capturing. They're essentially getting all the blocks as they're found, and even transactions as they're in the mempool, and basically trying to index the important features that need to be remembered about those transactions such that they can be looked up by, such that someone can say, hey, what's the transaction history for this address? And they both have different kind of things that they care about. So like what's on chain has this tagging functionality that different outputs, they'll say this is a one-set ordinal, or this is a STOS token, or whatever else. And so then they do have mechanisms which you can kind of query what's on chain and say, hey, what are the last 100 transactions that had STOS tokens in them, or whatever. Yeah. Jungle Bus takes kind of a different concept to that, where, I mean, the underlying data is mostly the same, and it has some very, very similar endpoints. But Jungle Bus is not trying to like maintain a UTXO set. Jungle Bus is more about, let me get much richer metadata about the transactions, and then you can look those up kind of the same. Okay, there's no website to look stuff up on Jungle Bus, but there is ways for code to basically build a subscription that says, hey, anytime a transaction comes through that is identified like this, I want you to feed that to me. And so both those are kind of like top level. They're plugged into a Bitcoin node or into the Bitcoin network, and they're watching what's happening on chain and trying to save information about whatever topics are built into them that they care about. And in the case of what's on chain, UTXOs as well. Now, Jungle Bus does store some stuff, like it stores what transaction a UTXO was spent in. So it's not actually keeping anything about the UTXOs themselves, but it does keep track of this UTXO, this transaction output was spent in this other transaction. So then moving kind of the next step down to these overlay services, there are actually kind of a number of, we'll say 80% overlay services out there right now. Yeah. So like everything that's was like the old Bitcoin social stuff that was started. In fact, in some ways you could even say that, I don't remember Unwriter's Tools names, but some of the Planaria type stuff was like the first steps down there, but those still kind of, the blocks are what sourced those transactions. So the fact that this happened on the chain and something is watching the chain and it's parsing everything that happens on the chain to see what fits in its indexers and its buckets was kind of like the first step down that path. But then there's been stuff built out in the BitChat ecosystem that I know no one's really using, but it's still around and it comes and goes and people play with it for a while. And honestly, how Tree Chat and like Hodlocker and even Twetch, like all these things kind of use transactions that are being indexed kind of for, great, these are Bitcoin social transactions, these are B files, these are map data. So the real kind of difference from overlay services or an overlay from a top level full chain indexer is simply where do they get the transactions that they're processing. So the full chain indexers are literally looking at every transaction that's on the chain and filters those into their world. Where an overlay is more of like some external logic is giving me transactions that I can then validate, make sure they're valid, they fit my rules, and then kind of ingest them. And those data sources can be simply users on a system broadcasting transactions. Those can be, it can be a Jungle Bus or a What's on Chain subscription that says, hey, here's some things you're going to want to look at and see if they fit your rules. But it can also be kind of peer-to-peer syncing with other people who are running those same networks. And so that's where kind of the overlay services really gets into one user or organization or group is standing up a server that is indexing this subset of all the transactions on chain. And someone else who's interested in that same topic can stand up their own version that's also doing the exact same work. So it's not like we're sharing, it's not like one is trusting the other or anything.
Right.
But they can have a relationship where they let each other know about new data that comes into that overlay. Sure. So a good example of that might be kind of like where OneSat market could end up, in that there's OneSat ordinals out there. There is a established contract that when you want to sell something, you lock it up in this contract. Yep. And so there might be an overlay that's doing nothing but keeping track of people's listings on the marketplace. And so they could make a listing in OneSat.market, mm-hmm. and someone else can have their own marketplace where their users can list items there, and both OneSat market and this other site will just keep in sync with each other of what is the inventory that is available for sale. Now, that's not to say each marketplace can't, like when a user goes and actually completes a transaction, like says, I want to buy this, each marketplace can put their own fees on it. They can put their, like, they can help the user build out that sale however they want, but their inventory is shared because those two things keep in sync with each other. And again, that could be fed by something like a Jungle Bus, but it also doesn't, there's nothing that depends on it having everything that ever existed. It's just, I've got this chunk of transactions in my scope. You've got those in your scope. It's probably beneficial for us to share those.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I think in my mind, it's always looked like the hybrid model of, I think you have like two groups of maximalists in big block Bitcoin. You have the everything must be peer-to-peer SPV people. And then you have the, oh, wow, it's data. We need to index it in server model, everything in the universe. And I've always been a both and on this, because I think some things clearly benefit from one versus the other. And, that's okay. But this concept of the overlay, I've always thought of SPV actually as an overlay conceptually anyways, is that you're having a series of logic that allows people to have an offline transaction that is then broadcast by the recipient. But what are they broadcasting to? Like, by what metric is it? Like, are you just sending that to your node or to an API that's connected to a node or whatever? But yeah, it's an interesting way to specialize and then incentivize specialization to make all this stuff work. Because I think it's pretty obvious that, while we talk about BSV being scalable blockchain, the SV node is not the final form. It's not the example of, hey, look, we solved everything. Like, we solved a lot of things, but it's we've also figured out what its limitations are. What do you think, like, when you look at the engineering stack and some of the stuff that BSVA is doing? I know you've been integral in working on like the Go SDK library and some of those things. What do you think from a tooling standpoint, as that stuff matures and professionalizes, is there anything that you wish like we could also focus on if you had, a magic wand and $1 billion? Is my favorite question. Or it'd be like, here, fix this. What would that be?
There's a lot of, we'll say, proofs of concept that are kind of bolt-ons to the different thing. I mean, honestly, pretty much everything I've worked on for the last 2 years is largely still a proof of concept. And just honestly, how I am as a developer, like, I'm good at conceptualizing how to make something scale. Like, what are the roadblocks you're going to hit? I've got 6 years of experience of what's not going to work for how to broadcast transactions.
Yep.
So as far as like structurally laying things out, I've got a pretty good grasp on that when it comes to projects, but like nothing is finished. Everything is in some state of, I mean, even the bigger projects like the OneSet indexer that feeds OneSet Market and Yours Wallet and things like that, like it's stood up. I mean, there might be, I think there's 2 different copies of it stood up, but it's just like manually keeping them in sync. And when I do updates on one, I got to do them on the other. And there is no professionalization in like that level of the stack of like, okay, this is built to be something that's rock solid that you can rely on. At this point, mostly, like, in fact, that same Lightning Eric guy kind of called out some issues in Yours Wallet over the weekend.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think my initial interpretation of him was that he was pretty disingenuous. And so I was fairly not the most gracious. And he kind of called me out at the end of it, and I reread it, and I definitely brought some baggage into that conversation. But like, I totally. What was your question? I lost it.
Like fixing. Yeah, if you had a magic wand and $1 billion, what would you fix? And then you brought up an issue with Yours Wallet.
Oh yeah, so I guess there is a ton of opportunity for lots of these 80 to 90% solutions to kind of be wired together in a really, really impressive show of, as Zach Streams used to be, of Bitcoin is internet, of just like the way that we can really have, I mean, essentially in almost all areas, you can replace things that are done in Web 2 internet technologies in Web 3 in a really, really cool distributed peer-to-peer fashion. But so like all the infrastructure pieces that my different sets of toolings have been based on are all kind of one-offs, or like the OneSet indexer right now has a lot of different things that it can be configured to deal with.
Right.
But that whole layer of like overlay services, okay, how do these things sync with each other, and how do multiple people run their own infrastructure that focuses on these topics?
Yep.
That's something that kind of BSVA has done a lot of really, really good work in the last year of kind of establishing. I mean, they've got a reference client that's in TypeScript, and you can run, but it's not like that was thought through of, okay, how do I do this in something that's dealing with 1 million transactions a day or a month or whatever. It's like, it's not thought from a performance standpoint. So there's still a little more of like having compatible tools that are compatible with that TypeScript reference standard in something that's far more high performance. And so there's a lot of still the infrastructure pieces to be built out, but I feel like we've got a pretty good roadmap now of kind of what that whole ecosystem looks like, and what are the interfaces to implement with, and how to implement the peer-to-peer syncing of two overlays syncing with each other, and how do wallets back up. So Degan I think he did a like week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that, did a post of like kind of this whole roadmap, and it was really, really kind of invigorated my excitement for the maturity of at least the language that all the different pieces need to speak to each other, which is, I mean, that's a huge thing for developers to, I mean, even just naming variables and like, that's hard. And so the fact that people put effort into just saying, here's a standard, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I've thought about myself is, we have the people that we have, we get people from, the UK and Switzerland, and you got guys like yourself who are, basically independent, or guys like, Degan living in Texas and talking to, a few people a day about these things. So there's like these little pods everywhere, but I always wonder, like, what would BSV look like if you handed it off to Google or Amazon or somebody to be like, hey, how would you take this whole system and make it all work? Because, these people, presumably, I mean, they have the biggest budgets in the world, so presumably they can hire the best engineers in the world to solve some of these more delicate and intricate problems about scale and data in general, and they've scaled the internet. So hey,
Yeah.
how many things do they know that we don't know that they could apply to this distributed system? But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts like that where you just see how we consistently do something and say, so just I'd be embarrassed to show this to somebody that was like a Facebook scaling engineer or something like that?
Yeah, that's it's kind of an interesting conundrum because kind of Bitcoin is very much a canvas that you can do lots and lots of different things in lots and lots of different ways. And so there's a fine line to go down between kind of at what point you start defining standardizations. And I mean, tokens is a great example of that.
Yeah.
There is in BSV, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 essentially disparate and mostly all unused, or those that are used are mostly used for worthless things. And my own technologies absolutely fit that category.
Yep.
But every different approach has different trade-offs. And I don't think we need to get to a point that says this is the one token concept that you use, because in reality, you don't want to get to a point where you've got such a limited view of what the chain can do that let's like, okay, because then you very much get into like Ethereum and ERC20. So like there's a lot of different ways you could represent tokens even on Ethereum, but it got established early on that, okay, here's this one token protocol. This is how they work. And then over time, there was a couple extensions kind of added onto that such that different token contracts could kind of flag information to each other. And so you could tell if you got paid in one, but it's still, you end up getting to the point where the whole concept of tokens gets really narrowed down into this specific approach to doing them. But at the same time, there does need to be also like, okay, you want to create just a loyalty point for your business. How do you do that? Well, you can do it a lot of different ways. And so there does needs to be, I think, still easier tools that
some
just
guidance
says,
at least.
here's the quick start. Here's the Squarespace for Bitcoin. That you just go in, you click a couple buttons, you put a little data in, and you have a solution that does accomplish what you want it to. But it might not be how you scale this to corporate securities or whatever else.
Makes sense. Let's take a few questions from the crowd. I see a few really good ones starting to stack up here. So we'll let the producer select some goodies. Isn't Bitcoin considered an open source project? Yes.
I mean, it is an open source project, but I think so. There's many layers to that. So like, ultimately, so there's a lot of talk about Terranode and fights over concepts of NAR and DAR and all these other things, when in reality, Terranode is an implementation of the open Bitcoin protocol. And so things that are part of Terranode and are part of like Terranode's license agreements. And if you want to run Terranode software, you have to do what, and I have no idea what, I mean, I'm not an internal person that actually knows what those rules are or anything. I have no idea. No. But the protocol itself is, I mean, essentially set in stone. Now, obviously, there's a couple of these different hard forks and agreements and things like that, but like, still, it's a public, like I can literally find a block by doing math on a piece of paper and getting binary that says, okay, now I'm not going to win a race to do that, but if there's no one competing against me, you can make a completely valid Bitcoin block without having any node software at all. You just have to have, you have to know the network state, and you have to figure out a random number that when you hash it all together gives you the proof of work proof. So So it's like there's kind of different levels of the open source stuff that like the protocol, it really doesn't matter if the software is open source or not. And there's probably incentives for certain miners to not use open source software to do that,
Yep.
to optimize however they want to for how they work with their clients and whatever the most performant and economic way to handle the chain they want to. And as long as the blocks they produce are indistinguishable from any other block in any other node software, it doesn't really matter. But yes, Bitcoin is an open source project.
Yeah. Thank you for the thorough answer. That's good stuff. Next one, please. From a developer's point of view, does BSVA ever stand in your way, or do they make your job harder, easier, any involvement at all? Good question.
So this answer, I think, gets a timestamp of somewhere in the last 12 to 18 months. In that, before that, I wouldn't say they really ever got in the way, but there was a whole lot of kind of dictates from on high that never really reached out to. I mean, there was definitely a feeling of, like, especially with crypto fights and the struggling we had to kind of scale the things we needed to of, and certainly our investment came from the same place as investment as everyone else. And so there's a mandate from, not really a mandate, but like a kind of a driving factor that says, keep this transaction load up, show what it can do, but yet hit real roadblocks of like, okay, but like there is no mechanism for us to actually get these transactions broadcasted reliably. And so all this effort doesn't go into making the product better. It goes into simply building a pipeline that I can get these transactions broadcasted. But in the last, I want to say 18 months, that is completely flipped on its head. BSVA has been really, really good and helpful, and they've reached out to fund a number of different projects from a number of different developers in the ecosystem. They're really trying to kind of get everyone on the same page, and big props to kind of the last 18 months of how they've dealt with developers.
No, that's great. No, I think really good. And it's been my experience too, actually. In fact, the exact same, where I was just like, oh, like why is it like this? And then it turned into like, oh, thank God these people are actually good to work with.
Yeah.
So can you talk more about the limitations of BSVA's TypeScript library?
I mean, I guess other than just the fact that it's in TypeScript and therefore like I don't really see a lot of limitations from it. I like it a lot. And in fact, they've come up with this script template kind of mechanism within the TypeScript library, which is also implemented in the Go library. The Go library is basically kind of using the TypeScript library as a reference design. So it's a little bit behind as far as new features, but the interfaces and everything are very similar. I like it a lot. It definitely does, like a lot of the ways that people have just always done Bitcoin. You get some like warnings that, oh, these are deprecated features and whatever. And some of that's a little bit annoying because it's like, they may be deprecated, but,
right, but I'm still using it.
They're out there and people are using it and we need to support it. But at the same time, I really like it. If there's any erroring in it, I will say, and I don't even know that this is a bad thing. This might be a really, really good thing, but it treats everything as SPV first, almost to the detriment of trying to wire in things that aren't. But you can still totally do it. You just got to kind of now at the same time, that might be exactly what's needed to kind of get us to that SPV future. So we'll see. But I like it.
Yeah, no, that's been the feedback I've heard too, is essentially the same thing, that like it's net good and also like guiding you a direction which may or may not be, like, it's irritating but not bad, has been essentially what everyone has said about it.
Yeah.
It's funny. Let's take another. I get something in the private chat. Nah, let him cook. Let's just keep taking questions. I think there's a few more good ones. Hey, Kurt, question, please. Yes, Mo Miller. How is Terranode doing? When do you think it will be live, and where are those transactions coming from? So, I mean, a block has been mined with it. We have listeners on the network. It's literally, I mean, it's like the pace car or something, right? Like you're like everybody's on the track, everybody's kind of calibrating, and everybody's making sure nothing's going to break. And that's kind of where we're at. I kind of think it's like an any day, any moment sort of situation where so there's still active development in Terranode, and actually development's going to remain active probably for years in the current implementation of Terranode. But like right now, Root, who is our COO, working alongside the Terranode team, like they're getting fresh updates a couple times a week, and then okay, push this, now test this, now do this, now do, like it's very actively being developed, both internally by the software team and externally with people like us, the people in the field that actually operate the damn thing. So it's been good. Like we've had nothing but good experiences there too. Partially because the people that are working on it largely worked with Gorilla Pool and worked in production before moving to that software team anyway. So they're not just, a room of computer scientists, well, what if we solved it this way? Like they're literally like, okay, this was really irritating when I was doing this job over here. So let's make sure Terranode works this way. So that experience has been great. And I would not be shocked to hear anyone just being like, you know what, we're going to go live in 10 days. Don't tell anybody. Let's just start mining blocks with it or something. But I don't know. Frankly, we could probably mine blocks with it now. It's really just kind of got to connect it to the pool.
Yeah, but I think actually there's some like it can do the basic things it needs to make new blocks. But I think, and I haven't looked at the code. I don't exactly know the ins and outs of it, but it does very much seem like there are a number of things that are being relied upon, like SV node is still being relied upon to kind of take care of some of the basics. And so, I mean, I know months ago, I'm sure this isn't the case anymore, but months ago, there was some issues with like when syncing the original chain, when kind of doing the initial block sync, like there was some period of time where there was different rules. And so they had to like switch in one script interpreter library to be able to handle those rules and a different one to be able to do a different chunk of blocks. So it's like the actual initial sync of the chain, just there wasn't a clean core piece of software that emulated exactly what is in the SV node. Now, my understanding is that's been completely cleaned up now, yeah. But just as an example of like it can do what it needs to do to make new blocks. But everything else that needs to happen on the network, there are still, I think, many pieces that rely on SV node to do that.
Yeah, it's and for full clarity, yes, it is not at feature parity with SV node on everything works the way expected. But you're correct in that it absolutely can and has mine blocks. Like it'll validate stuff, it'll propagate transact, like it does all the basic stuff, but it's more the feature rich stuff and making sure that as it's doing all these new feature rich things, that there's not some like, oh, there's a bug in script validation or TX validation or whatever. You have to test a lot of variables when you essentially have infinite variables that you could create, or there's probably I don't even know 100 million or 1 billion possible variables for the way to construct a transaction, or even if you like, let's say there's 100 million transactions in a block. And however many ways you could sort them, like we're talking trillions of possible variations and variables that need to be calculated for in the node. So it's not a trivial thing to finalize, but I've been saying for a couple months that at some point, as one of the officers at Gorilla Pool, I may be very unreasonable and say, you know what, just flip the switch, let's just do it. So. We'll see. We'll see what happens when we get there. What's the difference between overlays and layers on BTC?
So an overlay is, I mean, can be looked at kind of like a layer, but everything exists on the same base chain. So an example of this is something like ordinals. Or, well, we'll just use ordinals as an example. Like, what you're sticking on the chain in ordinals, in one set ordinals, is like it's a locking script that Bitcoin knows how to understand. It knows how to move these tokens from one person to another. But then there's other rules that are kind of like when you see a transaction and the outputs are laid out like this, and this input was of this type, and that implies some other knowledge of what is happening in this transaction. Like there's a second layer of interpretation of what's actually happening at the base layer. And so kind of in BSV, a lot of these tokens are still kind of like layer 2 tokens, but they're not layer 2 in like BTC, where in BTC you're like, or in Ethereum as well, you're like committing something on the one chain, and then you just go and do a bunch of other stuff on outside of the chain altogether that has no visibility into what's happening on the chain. And then at some point you get some signatures and some proofs or whatever that you can load back into the main chain that says, okay, I've got everything I need. I'll just trust that whatever happened in there happened and it's good.
Right.
So, and honestly, a lot of this on BSV, there's so much potential that I don't even know that it's totally like layers on BTC are kind of like, you've got this core layer. It can do these very few things. And it's got some ways that you can kind of lock things up such that you can do them somewhere else. But on BSV, right, like you could build whole second layers that run in a single chain of UTXO spends on the main layer. You can have Ethereum that is the whole state of Ethereum lives on one UTXO, and every new block is that you're spending that UTXO and updating its state to be a new. So you can actually emulate full blockchains on BSV. You can do, so it's really hard to kind of say it is this one concept. It's very much a wide open canvas that you can look at things many, many different ways. And some of those might be layers, and some of those might be layers that are implemented in layer 1 script. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing for me that stands out is that the stuff in BSV, there's some that are one-to-one analogs to each other, like ordinals, for example, as essentially the same idea on both chains. And the way they're bootstrapped is similar. But I think when most people talk about layer 2, they're talking about Lightning Network, the most well-known layer 2. And I always say Lightning Network isn't exactly a layer 2. It's a separate network. It has its own nodes. It has its own security policy. And Lightning Network can work on its own without a blockchain also. And so it is itself sort of a standalone concept that connects tangentially to Bitcoin in that situation. Whereas the stuff that we think of as an overlay or a layer 2 in BSV, like you said, is actually sort of contained within and actually in constant interaction with the chain itself as a source of data.
Yeah, but I guess I do want to just caveat that a little bit, is it doesn't actually have to be, though. I mean, you can still do the same, and there are many, many use cases why you might want to like lock up some state in a UTXO that has some consortium that needs to sign off on that state getting updated to the next state. But where all that stuff comes from doesn't have to be on the layer 1 chain. It can be literally anywhere else, as long as what you've got on the chain, you're able to provide the proofs that it's looking for and the whatever logic it's looking for to change that. So there isn't any one answer. You can do lots of different things in lots of different ways. And that's something that is hard to approach, of like, okay, how do we, I mean, if we're giving this to Amazon or Google to say, how do you make this what it can be? Well, they might have one take on it, but there are many, many other takes, and there's room for them all to survive and thrive.
Yeah. So to Mark's question here, he's saying, so Lightning is only bad because it's money. So Lightning isn't fundamentally bad. Like, payment channels conceptually are a useful tool. My problem with Lightning is this notion that Lightning Network is a necessity for Bitcoin to scale. Like, that is that predicate demand on your brain that, well, Bitcoin doesn't scale and therefore we need to build this other system and sort of bolt it on so that it can scale separately. And it's just not the case. Like, in Bitcoin script, you can launch payment channels natively in and on Bitcoin. Like, This is something that can be done and created. And the way that it was pushed in was, it's like the I don't know, it reminds me of the old adage about like the government breaking your legs and selling you a wheelchair, or giving you a wheelchair and being like, hey, thank us, right?
Yeah.
And it's just not reality. Like, the ability to do high frequency trading, which is really what Lightning is a great concept. It's absurdly convoluted, and it's predicated on all this other stuff being created, like eliminating transaction malleability, adding things like SegWit. Like, it has all this stuff that required lots of deep and fundamental changes to Bitcoin in order to give us Lightning. And Lightning is more complex and less scalable than the fundamental built-in way to do payment channels that was inherent to Bitcoin, that now has gotten essentially no research done into it. Like, we don't do anything the easy way because there's been maybe $1 billion spent on doing it the hard way, and Lightning Network is still minimally adopted. Like, it is not a heavily used technology because it's convoluted and complex.
Well, and ultimately, too, it is removing, or it's temporarily sidestepping everything that Bitcoin solved,
Right.
to have to then try to solve again. And
Yep.
their unsolved problems, and one might even say unsolvable problems,
Yep.
that Bitcoin solved, if you just get rid of that. I mean, the 1 megabyte block cap is essentially like that. Well, that and replaced by fee. Like, there's a number of things in there that just miss the whole concept. Because Lightning, you still have the fact of people can cheat at Lightning. And Lightning depends on watching the network for what is happening on the network, such that the cheating basically gets locked up for some period of time. And that is a period of time where someone can show a proof that proves there was cheating.
Right.
Well, that's all well and good, but if simultaneously with this attack, there's also a ramp up in demand for block space, you can very easily get to a point where in order to pay to provide the proof that someone cheated, it's going to cost you more money than what you're going to lose. And so therefore it's not even worth fighting. And so
there's also a few ways to attack channel state, where you purposely are being malicious with channels, and then you force channel closure, which forces an on-chain transaction. So there are ways to cheat Lightning, and then cheat close it so that you spend the money back to you. So you're creating a pretty complex but ultimately easier to do double spend vector as well. Like, it's very difficult to double spend on the main chain when you're making transactions, but if you can control a few variables, it's easier to do in Lightning than it would be had we just been using the main system. So
your statement would be true, except for the fact that RBF exists. And so even on the main chain, there's a lot of double spend potential on BTC.
Yeah.
But
no, it's a pain in the butt. So what are the negatives for big blocks? What's the argument against them from a small blocker's point of view? It doesn't seem to make sense.
It really is completely different ideas of how the network runs. The fact of the matter is, big blocks means the cost to run a node goes up exponentially. In fact, prohibitively. And there is always going to be a subset of users on the network, namely the miners, who have got to scale up and be able to provide that visibility into what is the UTXO set, they have to have that information. I think, though, there is this in the BTC side. I mean, I know it's kind of old hat in the BSV world of like, yes, you can run a node that sees every transaction that's happening and can validate everything that happens. But if something happens that doesn't agree with your node, what can you do about it? Not a thing. So there is kind of, BTC is more, I guess, user auditable, more traceable, that what happens falls in line with what should have happened. But I don't know, like, that doesn't, in a lot of ways, it shouldn't really matter what happened on the chain. What should matter is what happened with your payments, your UTXOs, your transactions. And BSV a big block Bitcoin provides proofs that you can audit that state with. But it shouldn't matter to me one way or another if someone double spends you. I mean, it does as a friend, but
Right. Yeah, it's not actually your problem.
Yeah.
The way I've distilled it down the simplest is that the small blocker believes that everyone should be able to audit at the cost of most people not being able to transact at scale, versus the big blocker wants everybody to be able to transact at the cost of not everybody able to audit. And it's just two completely different sets of values about why a blockchain exists and what problem that it's intended to solve. And
yeah, and to clarify, that's their ability to universally audit. You can still audit when you've got the pointers and you know what you're looking for, but if it's just the whole chain, yeah.
Right. Well, and that's exactly true too. Like the only way you wouldn't be able to audit everything that should matter to you is if there's like a fundamental problem with Bitcoin or with SHA-256, because if those things actually work, then you can actually audit your Bitcoins. You just can't, like you said, audit the entire network. So no, good point of clarity there. I would love to take Mark Hademan's question here. Can you explain the role of Tal's ARC now in the Terranode era? Gorilla Pool also runs an ARC instance for what it's worth. I think
several, actually.
Yeah. Indeed.
So technologically, under the covers, there will be things that change for ARC from a SV node to a Terranode world. But as far as the role of ARC and what it does, I don't really think there's actually that big of a change to it. So essentially, in the SV node world, in fact, going back to the example I said earlier about like CryptoFights transactions and trying to get all these complicated interrelated transactions on chain, we would be broadcasting those directly to a Bitcoin node. And that node, which is running SV node, like SV node has some problems right now that when it's working on validating a big block, it just like, that's what it's doing. And so while it's validating a block, it can't fulfill requests from users. It can't take in new transactions. And so at CryptoFights, we had to like create this very, very complex mechanism for keeping multiple states of where transactions were and when they'd been broadcasted and what approvals we had received back, and then requerying. So basically, we had to build in this whole buffering layer that says, okay, we validated a transaction when we created it. We know that everything within our view is good about this transaction. But then it just kind of goes into this holding pattern of like, we've got this other process that's like, get these things mined, get these things mined, get these things mined. And at that point, while we were in that state, like if one of our users wanted to kind of nefariously double spend themselves, well, there's hundreds or thousands of transactions that depend on that one. And so if they were able to double spend it and get that outside of our broadcast pipeline to someone else's broadcast pipeline, well, that would like invalidate a huge section of our data that just hasn't been mined yet, because one early transaction that everything else depended on isn't valid anymore. And so none of them are valid. So ARC basically brings a ton of tools into kind of this buffering layer between you're an app that's building transactions and here's a miner actually mining those transactions. So ARC basically, one, gives you some utilities to basically further validate and confirm that this will be mined. It deals with making sure that it does get mined. So if we're into one of these cases where SV node is got too much stuff in it and it starts dropping things out of its view, well, ARC can actually rebroadcast that and reintroduce it to the network. And then you can also really fine tune when you broadcast ARC, when do I want to get a success back? Do I want it to be just once I know ARC has this and it's going to keep trying to broadcast it? Or it can also be once I know that it's going to broadcast to a node and propagated to another node. And that at that point, I'm like, okay, this is going to get mined because it has gone through 2 nodes that have both said, yeah, this is a good transaction. They're working on it. That means that doesn't conflict with what any other nodes at the center of the network have shared with them. And so you can get a much finer grained probabilistic finality. Now it's still probabilistic, and you still have to decide, okay, when I broadcast this, do I want to wait up to 30 seconds for it to propagate the network? Or do I just want to know, okay, ARC's got it, it's going to take care of it, it'll come back to me in 100 milliseconds, and I can move on with my world. So you really get to kind of nail in how much finality you want before you trust things and move on with them.
Sure. No, I like it. I just realized it's after the top of the hour, but I could keep talking to you for a bit if you got a little extra time, Dave.
Yeah, I got some time.
Cool. So before we take more questions, and there's a few more that I'd like to take, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the streams you've been doing. First, like, why did you decide to start making streams about some of the technical stuff, and then what's your experience been like being actually having quite successful streams right out the gate?
So I guess there's the why is, so I live in Michigan, not a big city, not a small city, mid-sized city, and like I've been kind of obsessed with Bitcoin specifically since, I mean, pretty much since the BSV fork. So what is that? Fall of 2018. So it's years,
been a while,
many years. And this has been something that's been really kind of, I mean, I've thought about going out and getting other jobs or doing other things. And it's like, none of that's not where my expertise is. That's not where my interest is. And so it's been something that has been kind of maybe even overly consuming in my life. And so one aspect, it is literally just kind of, you say, like, isolation and loneliness of like, I'm working on this stuff all day, every day, and I'm doing it heads down in my own little world. Yeah. And I think I've learned a lot of lessons to share, and most everything up to this point has been kind of just like in my head, my own lessons. And I'm really not good at saying, let me document my thought process here. I'm very stream of consciousness. And so, I mean, one of the first things was, get just documentation of what I've been working on. And it's not going to be that I'm preparing this it's literally, let's walk through this thing and get it recorded such that it is documented that this is how this works, or this is the thought process in here. And then another one is very much to try and make myself available, one, for people who are interested in this stuff, for me to build relationships with them and share my knowledge and help bring the whole chain forward. So, I mean, it's everything from kind of developer evangelism to interact with people and have people ask questions and pick my brain and really kind of be put to use, rather than just like, hey, go out and kind of figure out this thing or that thing or whatever your idea is. Let's kind of bring it back into, no, let's figure out stuff for other people that they can go out and build, rather than everything being dependent on not just me figuring it out, but me actually bringing it to a reality as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an abundance mindset, right? Like 50 developers is better than 10. So, I've also really liked the guest model, where you essentially, you bring in a host for every episode that is sort of the one asking you the questions, right? It's a little bit of a reverse on your typical stream where like, hey, welcome to my show. It's me again. I'm the anchor, but like, you're the anchor person, but you're not the person asking the question usually. So
and that's actually a model I would like to refine better. Because I feel like I've had a lot of feedback of people basically saying that they think I do a really good job of kind of crossing that bridge between the technical concepts and just real world practical application of what this is. And that doesn't mean it necessarily gets to the point that someone who doesn't have any clue about software development or Bitcoin is going to be able to have, I mean, I can't talk with my mother, and my mom's not going to tune into my streams and like, oh, you did good today or whatever. Because it's like, that's not where this is. It's still very much the technical audience, but to get from the standpoint that says, I mean, I'm very, very impressed with the work that Ty has done. But when you talk with Ty about things, it's very much like everything is all reference to other known concepts, other like cryptographic standards or documented standards or whatever. It isn't like hi mom. It isn't cryptographic standards and that kind of stuff. It's very much just like, this is what you're actually doing. This is what these things mean. What are we doing here?
Yeah. No, it's been really good. Especially, and it's a really good point. Somebody like me who's been, I'm not particularly technical. I also sort of see myself as a bridge person where I'm just technical enough to understand what's going on and where we could be going and how to implement, but also pretty good at translating that to like, hey, maybe I don't know how to code at all, or maybe I'm only pretty basic on this stuff, and kind of explaining at a higher level how the system should work or could be implemented or whatever. But I love that you're sort of one step deeper into the next level of audience on more specifically on the technicals and the how to. But no, they're really good, and I'm really excited to see them going. Do you prefer people jump on the streams for like on YouTube or on X? You mentioned you have both, but what do you prefer?
Honestly, I have not gotten the habit down or the trick down yet of reading comments, or when I do, they end up being more distracting than helpful. I mean, honestly, there's been a handful of comments on anything, and I've missed most of them, but it's not like there's an active environment. But that is one thing. Like, I actually would like to do kind of office hours type streams where it's like, come up, bring your thing, we'll go wherever. Mm-hmm. But I'm also I get very focused. And so that next step up of someone who's technical enough to understand what the questions are and where they're going and what people will be interested in. I don't know. It's just, there's a lot to manage, especially, I mean, I've recorded 2 quite good streams that never ended up getting recorded because I was fumbling around with the stuff and like setting out to like, okay, we're going to stream this conversation, and just the management of it led to me clicking the wrong button or whatever. And so it's like, there's definitely a lot of that I still need to get better at, and also probably figure out the right method, the right model to actually have someone facilitate that more. But it's all very much a work in progress. I mean, I think I did one yesterday, which was very short. And at the end of it, I basically said, oh, this one sucked. So it's like, I'm not trying to like have some polished thing where it's like, this is a prepared presentation. That really is, let's take this. So it's either questions that people have or a topic that just says, we're going to dig into this, see where this leads us. And then as questions arise, let's dig into those and figure out those more. And so I kind of, I've done a lot of varieties of ways to do it. The one approach that has not worked well, that I kind of early on was trying to basically do a Twitch-like thing. It's basically like you're riding along while I'm just working. And narrating what I'm doing in those situations and thinking through how I'm going to solve things at the same time. Like, I can have a conversation about here's how we could solve this, or I can think through coding, which is how I do it. But when trying to narrate that while I'm doing it, one, it's exhausting. Or I can, there's something I'm working on, I can sit down and focus on it for 8 hours and barely stop except for to use the bathroom and get some water. As soon as I start narrating it, I got 90 minutes and I'm just shot for the day. So it's the kind of keeping present in both places really is hard.
Yeah, that makes sense and relatable. I have tried to do this show without a producer, and I can tell you it's impossible. The quality drops rapidly anytime I've had to manage it myself, which has only been maybe 4 or 5 shows in the last. God, it's season 5. I've been doing this for 5 years, but but yeah. So I can relate intimately with what you're saying. Any closing thoughts or bigger ideas before we let you go? I don't want to have the show go for too long, or people won't watch it just because it's long.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, not really. I mean, I feel like, well, first of all, I'm very excited about where we are right now. I'm very energized about it. It's really easy to look at. spinning our wheels on this for 6 years and the price hasn't really changed at all, or maybe even gone down a little bit. And if you're looking at like, okay, this, if your mindset is any bit the crypto ecosystem, you're going to get frustrated, and you're not going to stick around. Yeah. But having said that, the amount of kind of just I guess discovery that's been made over the last 6 years, and the amount of support that there is, and the amount of standardization that's coming, and kind of just where our world is, yep. On the 5 to 10 year roadmap, I don't know how you can't be just stoked about where we're going, because there really is no competition. There really is no one trying to look at this like it. Yeah, it's not like some new chain is just going to stand up and start working. Like fundamentally, even if you're dealing with the Suis and the Solanas and these like more advanced concepts, you still end up with this concept of global state. And that just like, it's just like the traveling salesman problem in Lightning. It's like, you might think that this is something that more engineering is going to solve, but there's no guarantee that that is actually ever solvable. It is a hard problem in the mathematical sense of hard, of not just like, boy, this takes a lot of work to do, but like there might not be a solution short of, and it's just like proof of work. Your whole solution is literally right now, guess numbers and see if they work.
Yep. Brute force.
Keep guessing more numbers and see if they work. So it's like, that is a hard problem. It's not like there is a solution that you can just like, oh, well, let me just fundamentally look at this differently and I can make it work. No, I mean, assuming ECDSA works, no, you can't. Yeah.
Cool.
So I'm excited. I think we're in a great place. The next couple of years, I'm really, really stoked to kind of see how they go. But if you're looking for BSV and BTC flipping, maybe wait a couple years.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Always good to have you on. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon. You and I talk most days anyway, so we'll talk later, I'm sure. So David,
I'm good, Kurt.
Take care. All right, let's. There's a few more starred questions. I will rapid fire through them, get them done in 3 minutes if possible. So, Mr. Producer, let's bring up the next one. Should everyone stop using BTC, or is BTC still Bitcoin if Lightning isn't used? Honestly, use what you want. If you need to make a payment to somebody that only accepts BTC, then why not use BTC? My problems with BTC are philosophical and technical, and in a lot of ways social, because a lot of those people who are sort of BTC maximalists don't like me and have made it personal, and so then I've done it back as well. And there's there's a lot of negativity to go around, I'm sure, but yeah, it's like, hey man, if you're in France, like spend euros, that's what they take. So could a vendor bypass Visa and MasterCard now through BSV without the inconveniences to the customer? Probably. You would need to have the point of sale set up to accept a stable coin that is bootstrapped on BSV in order to make that work. But if you can get over those hurdles, then the answer is sure. Yeah, why not? Next one. Let's how does SegWit work? Okay, so SegWit takes a basic Bitcoin transaction which is a page public key hash that points to the existence of a coin, but the coin doesn't actually exist. Okay, so you have a hash already. Now, with segregated witness, you are breaking out the signatures, which is the heaviest part of a Bitcoin transaction. You were replacing it with a hash, and you're putting that hash in a totally separate data structure, a separate Merkle tree. And then that hash is then referenced back to the original chain saying, there is a Bitcoin signature here, trust me, bro. And the trust me, bro is a cryptographic proof, so it's not in and of itself a terribly insecure way to do a trust me, bro, but it's still something of a trust me, bro. And it just adds, first of all, a whole other complex data structure. And it eliminates the functionality of a bunch of other things. You have to turn off other Bitcoin scripts in order for SegWit to exist. Otherwise, you start to create security vulnerabilities that aren't not a good idea. So it's a weird trade-off. It doesn't really it gives something like 3.5 times more efficiency in a transaction weight, but at what cost? A lot of extra processing and Just weird trust going into the system, and it's weird. It seems bizarre to me. How to learn to be a BSV developer? What steps should I follow? I think it depends where you're starting from. Like, can you code? Can you read code? Do you have any basic knowledge of software, computer science, game theory, or whatever? If you know how to code, I think everybody should get really comfortable in Bitcoin schema, script, and one set ordinals, all of which are documented pretty well. And if you have a pretty decent software background, I think all of it is pretty discoverable pretty quickly. There's also the new SDK stuff, so the TypeScript and Golang, and I believe Python SDKs are also pretty mature at this point. So you're able to use those to interact with all kinds of things to build what you want. So if you can't make it work from there, I think you need to work on your basic software skills first. Sovereign Wealth Fund of USA having a role in owning BSV. Is it viable or useful? Promises made, promises kept. Trump never said BTC. So I've never expected the government to save me. And I think if it happens, it'll probably be by accident. So a sovereign wealth fund, I don't know. I don't get it. I've always thought these concepts are fundamentally about laundering money and hiding funds and doing stuff like that. So like Harvard has a sovereign wealth fund, or so other large old institutions have these sovereign wealth funds, which are ways for rich people to make tax-free donations and cycle money to where they want it with less viability. I've also been very critical of this concept of like a strategic reserve. These things are tools that have a very specific purpose. Like the United States may strategically need oil in a pinch, right? Like there's a war or there's been a massive supply shock in oil. And so they can release from the strategic reserve for the sake of saving the nation if necessary. Bitcoin is not one of those things that like, oh my God, if Bitcoin goes away, like there's going to be some strategic problem with the economy that the president needs to fix. Now, if he's putting Solana in the strategic reserve, which Trump has said will be something in the crypto strategic reserve, well, I think that indicates that, he may need to pump liquidity into the Trump or Melania meme coins as some essential service of the United States government, which to me sounds like at least 2 levels of insanity that I don't want to have anything to do with. So all this stuff, I kind of don't care. I've always not really cared what the government is doing with or thinks about Bitcoin. It'd be nice to have allies who saw scalable blockchain and owning your own data and these kind of things as useful products, but that takes time. Government tends to be the slowest adopter of any good idea. Next question, or are we nearing completion? David is interesting. Enjoyed the show. He's also quite a good guy. So, all right, we're good. Let's wrap it up here. It is 3:18, meaning we've gone an extra 18 minutes over the allotted time. So our sponsors are getting almost 20% more value for their money. So thank you, everybody. We need to choose a comment of the day too. Let's pick one at random very quickly. Who had some good ones? It's a couple of fun ones. Just pick one. Just lotto it. Comment of the day. There you go. Hit it. You win, George. Please reach out to, it might be Jorge. I apologize. I never know how you want to pronounce, but reach out to the real CoinGeek account and let's do it. So reach out to the real CoinGeek account, give them your hand cash handle. You will get a prize pack from Champions TCG, one of our delightful sponsors. I am going to rest my voice and get back to all the other stuff that I'm up to on a typical Tuesday. Everybody, you have been a delight. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your likes, your subscriptions, and for hitting that alert bell. You make this all worthwhile. You, the audience, who I am begging, please be good to each other. If we can't be good to each other, then the rest of it is pretty unnecessary anyway. So get out there, go do some good in the world. Send prayers to all the people that you love and all the people you hate, because ultimately we probably need each other. So everybody, I will see you next week at Tuesday at 2 on Tuesday at 2 Eastern Standard Time, per usual, for the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. It has been a pleasure, and I bid you adieu. Goodbye.